Hello and welcome to episode 339 of the 21st Century Work-Life Podcast. My name is Pilar and I am your host. Today I have a wonderful guest. I am so excited to share his thoughts with you because I've been interacting with him on LinkedIn for quite a while and I really admire his work. Before we go into the interview, though, I just wanted to let you know about his book, which is called The Async-First Playbook, Remote Collaboration Techniques for Agile Software Teams. And indeed, this book is suitable for all kinds of remote teams. It's specifically useful for Agile software teams, and it uses some of that language. But I think anybody who's listening to this show who wants to understand more the nature of asynchronous communication, advocate for it, introduce it in their own practice and in their teams, you're going to enjoy it. And what Sumeet, who is the author, of course, we've got Sumeet Gayathri Moghe coming in a second, but what he's done is he's created a code so that you can go to the publisher's website and get a discount over the next 10 days. We are releasing this on the 2nd of November, 2023. So you'll have 10 days to use the code. Before we recorded, he suggested that if you are not in the US, you probably want to have a look at the shipping costs, even after the discount, because then maybe it's not the best place to purchase it. However, if you want to buy the ebook, you probably would do well in using that code. So the code again is not distant, and I will put the link in the show notes. For now, I hope you enjoy my conversation with Sumeet because I certainly did. Hello and welcome to the 21st Century Work-Life Podcast, where we talk about leading remote teams, online collaboration, and working in distributed organizations. My name is Pilar and I'm the director of Virtual Not Distant, a company where we help managers of remote teams to get the most out of online collaboration. You can find out everything we do over at virtualnotdistant.com. Hello and welcome to another episode of the 21st Century Work-Life Podcast, which is a very special episode for me because I am meeting in real time somebody who I have been interacting with online for ages, asynchronously, the topic of today's episode, of course. And I'm delighted to introduce you to Sumeet Gayathri Moghe, who is, well, first and foremost, I think, the author of the Async-First Playbook. So welcome, Sumeet.
Great to be on the show. Thanks for talking to me.
Well, again, I've been following your work online. I've been interacting with you. I'd like to say that I've collaborated a little bit on some of your bits and pieces that you put online. And you've been very generous also with checking out some of my stuff as well. So really delighted to be able to talk to you. And I did listen to your episode on collaboration superpowers also, which I recommend. Yeah, I recommend listeners check out if after this session you still want more from our guest, then you can check out episode 331 from Collaboration Superpowers with Lisette Sutherland, of course, who very old listeners of the show will remember from being a co-host on this show. So we are going to talk about asynchronous communication to celebrate the launch and the publication of the Async-First Playbook. But first of all, just a little bit about you personally. Where are you based?
So I am in Pune, which is on the west of India. So some people might know Mumbai because it's a more popular city, and this is about 120 odd kilometers from Mumbai. But in India, we don't talk in kilometers, we talk in hours. So it's about 4.5 hours drive from India, which might sound odd. 120 kilometers, 4.5 hours, probably not the kind of association people in the UK are making, but that's how it is.
I love that. I think that is such I love that you talk in hours rather than in physical distance, because again, it's also not the same. Like I can think in Spain of places which are 100 kilometers away and it takes you whatever, and places that are the same distance and it takes you twice the time. So I think it's really interesting. I had heard of Pune because one of my previous clients, who actually is now a very good friend, my friend Helena, who sometimes listens to the show, she was doing once a project that involved setting up something there. So I had heard of that one. And so what is it that you do professionally, Sumeet?
So I'm a technologist. I work for a company that builds custom software. It's called ThoughtWorks. And my primary role, which most software technologists will recognize, is that of a product manager, which really means that I try and do experiments to figure out what you need to build before a team actually goes ahead and builds it. And then I find a way to be able to release that to paying customers so that that feature that you've built actually becomes successful, right, in the market. And I've been doing that for a while now, for about a decade and a half with this company. Lots of internal products, lots of products for our clients and that kind of thing.
Yeah. So you're paid to experiment.
Well, when I say it like that, it sounds very fancy. But the idea is to spend as little money as you can up front to ensure that you don't waste a lot of money in the development process, which is significantly more costly, right? So testing a prototype with potential users, which is just click through, no business logic sitting at the back, is significantly easier than asking a team of 10 developers to spend the next 3 months coding only to realize that your users don't want that feature.
Yes, yeah, nice. So then the Async-First Playbook, is this something that you put together specifically for the agile world? How did that come about?
Yeah, I mean, in my context, it might seem that way, but I'm hoping that it's a little more broadly applicable. And I've told this story many times before, but look, I work in India, and you will probably know that a lot of software development that happens in India happens for clients that are based in a completely different geography, often in the West, right? Now, I'd like you to imagine, let's say, San Francisco in winters, Northern Hemisphere winter, there is really no time overlap between the team in India and, let's say, the stakeholders sitting in San Francisco. And what that means, if you're trying to work in a meeting-centric culture, is that you burn somebody out. Either you burn the stakeholders out or you burn the team out. Most often, it's the team that gets burnt out, right, over a period of time. And software development is inherently a creative activity. So one part of it is the burnout. The other part of it is that you can't work creatively if your entire day is punctuated with meetings. And if you notice how many teams are structured and all of the ceremonies that they have going, so they've got a stand-up meeting, they've got planning meetings, they've got brainstorming meetings, they've got decision-making meetings, they've got review meetings, they've got reporting meetings. And when you have so many meetings cluttered in your week, where are you getting the time to focus and do the work that you enjoy doing, right? So there's a lot of things that I feel stretch our status quo when we work in this meeting-centric fashion, not to mention the fact that there is an inclusion challenge as well. Look, you and I, for whatever background we might have had, we speak English reasonably fluently, right? But anyone who's been to India or anyone who's got any sort of a global perspective knows that different people speak English very differently. And if you've learned English, let's say, as a second language or a third language, you don't approach the conversation with that much confidence. So what happens in a meeting? It's people like me who have that fluency in English, who have many years of experience behind us. We speak and the others stay silent. And that's really a blow on inclusion. Then you add to it people who are neurodiverse, people who are introverted. I'm introverted, it doesn't seem that way, but the thing is, I've built a lot of social capital now. So I've been able to get more confident speaking. But a lot of people who are just starting off their career, but maybe new in the job, those people don't have that same kind of confidence. Now, how do you start involving them? A very meeting-centric culture is detrimental to including them as well. And then, let's say you will recognize this if you think about women in IT. IT has been notorious in terms of how poor our inclusion of women has been. Even to this day, in a country such as India, which produces so many women engineers, 30% women in the most inclusive companies of India. And obviously, women are not 30% of the population, right? So there's something that the IT industry does wrong when it comes to including women. And one of the things that we do wrong is we don't recognize that women have a disproportionate share of the household burden, which means they need that extra flexibility for them to feel that they're going to be able to engage productively. Now, if your entire day has obligations, I have to meet this person at this time, that person at that time, that team meeting, etc. It's a very inflexible environment for anyone with those kind of responsibilities to be part of the team. Anyone with caregiving responsibilities also can't be part of your team. So it's a big blow in inclusion. And I've been observing this for the last few years, but I've observed this more in the years of the pandemic because we all moved to a more meeting-heavy culture. And that's when I thought, we need to change this. And there's a trick or two I know, which I might want to share with my colleagues. Initially, it was really about sharing it with my colleagues, and then it said, oh, okay, maybe I can share it with the world. And then I started writing. Sorry,
Nice.
long-winded answer to a rather simple question that you asked.
Well, it makes complete sense. And actually what it shows is that the reasons for one advocating for async first, which I will ask you in a second what that means, and any kind of, and actually as an advocate myself of more asynchronous communication, there are many reasons, and the reasons are not just flexibility for flexibility's sake. There's a whole load of stuff. And when you're talking about your context as well, when you're working across different nations, across people with different languages and stuff, I think that it's interesting that there are many multinational companies with virtual teams, but there's still the asynchronous communication is not as probably as hot as it should be. And I think something that's come to mind quite recently, that I had a conversation with someone, and I think it really is not in our DNA or in the DNA of many companies, even international ones. So I was delivering a training the other day on how to use Zoom in an interactive way, like all the stuff that Zoom has. And somebody at the end of the workshop asked, what about captioning? Is there anything, how's it working? Is it working better? It's not great, and that. And she said, because there's the notion of inclusivity is very strong in the company. So when we're delivering the training, and we were talking, and I was thinking, and I said to her, well, it might be that we can't do any more than we are doing with technology in the meeting, in the actual training. And let's acknowledge that. And let's change how we're delivering to acknowledge that. The fact that some people are more proficient than others in a language, rather than try and get technology to solve that problem so that we can just carry on as normal, but technology translates for us or whatever. And I said, how about maybe having recorded the workshop or the presentation, take a transcript, send it through, or have more extensive handouts, which go a little bit more in depth so that people can actually read afterwards. Because people, in my opinion, people who've learned a second language can usually deal with reading more than listening and interacting. So, and this was really a revelation, the asynchronous space as a way of that inclusivity. So,
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah. Great. I didn't know if you were going to add something.
No, I was agreeing. And particularly that thing that you mentioned about transcripts. The thing with many of these models that generate transcripts automatically for you, the fact is that they're trained on voice models from Western countries. So even my accent isn't typical for what the model will understand and translate really well. And then you think about a country like India with its hundreds of first languages and then English being a second language. Or just think about the other accents that exist. People who speak Mandarin, they speak English differently. All over Africa, they speak English differently. It's really difficult to train a model to get those transcriptions right. So regardless of how advanced technology gets, I don't see that in the next 10 years, you're going to be able to solve these problems with technology alone. You'll need some human behavior change to make all of this work.
I think that is the missing piece, that we're used to technology and we tick a box like remote technology, tick a box ticked.
Yeah.
Right. But I digress. But thank you, because that all came from that diversity piece. And I do want to quote something which I read, at least in the early version of your book. If diversity is being invited to the party and inclusion is being asked to dance, asynchronous work helps that inclusion. I love that. I think it's a very, very beautifully put. So this term async first, does it mean we only do asynchronous in our team? Loaded question.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because I mentioned that throughout the book, that when I say async first, I don't mean async only. What I mean is that you start asynchronously, and then, if necessary, sync next, right? So how does that play out? Let's think about this. Let's say you want a meeting. Now, there are a few characteristics that make a meeting successful, and you're a facilitator, so you'll probably know this. There's some prep that everyone needs to go through just to wrap their heads around the topic that you're going to discuss in the meeting. Can you write a document with just enough information so everyone gets their head around and can prepare? That's starting async first. How does that help you? You don't have to spend the first 15 minutes setting context, right? So there you go. That's async first. Now, let's say you have to make a decision. You make the best decisions when everyone's privy to the same information. You can't just come into a discussion with everyone touching a different part of the elephant and imagining the situation differently and make a good decision at the end of it. So can you write up all the information that's necessary to make that decision? And maybe state what your preference is as well, because maybe you've already made a decision in your head and you'd like others to comment on it. Who knows? People will say, well, makes sense to me. We don't need the meeting. And there you go. You don't need the sync next in that case, right? And there are so many other situations. For example, people who are leading teams, I think they underestimate how much of their time goes into repetitive activities. So, for example, you're onboarding somebody. You're doing the same onboarding presentation again and again and again and again and again. You're giving the same instructions so many times. Is it possible that you could record those and reclaim the time that you were using in those repetitive activities and instead do a more heart-to-heart one-on-one where you get to know the other person better, right? Our time's a zero-sum game. We only have 8 hours in a day, 40 hours in a week. If we can take away some of this repetitive work, then it frees up our time to do other things. And that's the idea, that it doesn't have to be async only, but at least start with async as a default. And the beauty of this whole thing is, it's like we used to speak about Java back in the day. The promise of Java was that you write on one platform and your code works on all platforms. Write once, run anywhere. And that's the thing which I say with async, which is create once, write once, and run many times. So you create an onboarding document, you can use it many times. You make a decision record, people can refer back to it and say, oh, now I get why our software is a certain way, right? You write up an idea, many people can refer to it, give their feedback, you run it many times. And that's the beauty of the whole thing. As long as you understand the trade-offs between when do you go asynchronous, when do you go synchronous.
I love that. I love that, regaining our time, because one of the things I hear that people struggle with is, especially if we're defaulting to written as the main async, that some people might feel it's a little bit less human, there's less of it in us and whatever. And if you think about it, like, yes, there are things, it might feel like that, but what it allows you to do is get rid of the things that don't need as much of our humanity in it and reclaim the time, to use your words, to then have those conversations or those interactions where we need to be more present and more human. And I think that's a good way of framing it. Yeah.
In fact, what you say just reminds me, companies have all of these retreats that they do, right? They get people together. And I don't know if you've noticed, there's this tendency to convert those retreats into productivity theater. We're going to do this meeting and that workshop and this, that, and the other. And then you ask people, okay, so couldn't you have done all of these meetings virtually as well? And they'll say, oh, no, but meeting face to face allows us to bond with each other. So then I ask, well, then the purpose of getting together is bonding. Why do you need the contrivance of a meeting and a workshop and all of this work to bond with each other? Go out, go hike with your colleagues, maybe play whatever, right? Go bowling, watch a movie, do something. Why do you need this productivity theater? And that's the whole idea of reclaiming your time, that if you can do some of these activities a little more efficiently, then the time that you spend together can be addressed towards the value that you're seeking towards it, which you can't achieve otherwise, right? You can't achieve connection just by writing to each other. But the very fact that you and I are meeting together for the first time, we're able to make some level of eye contact, I can see some expression on your face, that creates a different level of connection from when we were just writing to each other. You had feedback from me on the manifesto and stuff like that, right? So I know a different Pilar just because of this real-time interaction. And I'd like for that to have its own value and its own dedicated slot.
Yeah, they're very clear. Yes, I think it's really important. And also to recognize what we're getting from all the different interactions. How are the different interactions developing our relationship? I love that you say you can now find it's a different side of me that you know, because one side of me is the writing side, and there's a certain thought process that goes into that. And this is a very different environment, and the context is very different. Nice. Oh, of course we can talk about this all day. Let me see if my notes can bring me back to. Oh yes. So with all this, I do think that some individuals struggle with even the async first mentality, and that's a challenge in itself. Let alone then moving into more asynchronous communication. But what about teams? I'm sure that some teams can find it easier to embrace this. So what do you think are the types of teams that can incorporate asynchronous communication easier into their workflow, just by the nature of their work? I mean, would Agile be one of them, for example?
Yeah, so software development's an easy candidate, right? And I think a lot of work can happen asynchronously. But even in IT, there are certain jobs that need a higher level of synchrony. So, for example, production support. Mm-hmm. Let us say there are these high-level production outages that you're constantly dealing with, and you are a frontline engineer for those kinds of things. You may struggle. I mean, seriously, if a website is down, you don't want somebody to asynchronously and slowly solve that problem. You want them right now to solve the problem and get your goddamn website out, right?
Yes.
So things that have a sense of urgency and immediacy will struggle with async. So customer service, obviously, that's kind of knowledge work. But if you're doing phone customer service, there is no asynchronous there. But on the other hand, written correspondence as customer service, asynchronous can work quite well and has worked very well for ages, even before we started talking about asynchronous, right? I'd say most kinds of knowledge work are incredibly suited to asynchronous ways of working, with some exceptions like, real-time customer service, production outages, and stuff like that. And even then, I think companies, employers, managers can be considerate to their employees by trying to rotate them across these different kinds of roles, where you don't always have to be at the sharp edge of production support, right? Can you do some lower level 2, level 3 support, which requires a little more deep thinking than always level 1 support that needs urgent, immediate assistance?
Yeah, that rotation, that's an interesting one. I hadn't thought of that. And it could even be within a team. I mean, I don't have an example right now, but even within a team where some people might, because of the nature of the task, might find it easier to incorporate async. If the team as a whole needs more, then maybe some rotation within those tasks. Either redesigning the work if we need it. This is the thing. If we want to go more async for whatever reason, probably for well-being, flexibility reasons, then is there a way of redesigning or even rotating? There's lots of ways of looking at it. And do you think that I think as well, I find that the social nature of a team also has a lot to do with it. What do you think around that? Like the social makeup of a team? I think that comes into it. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so there are a couple. One is at the individual level, right? So there is something that I consider as essential to anyone who wants to work asynchronously. And those are really four skills that an individual needs to have or they need to cultivate if this is a way they would like to work. And there are reasons you would like to work this way, right? Because it gives you more autonomy, it gives you a calmer way of working. So one is you need to learn how to write. Now, that doesn't mean that you need to become the next best-selling author writing fiction. You just need to write like a journalist. So get to the point as quickly as possible in the fewest words possible, keep it sharp, keep it simple, and be empathetic to whoever's reading your work. Right? So that's number one. The second is there's no point writing if nobody will read. So if everyone in the team needs to have the capacity to at least read for 10 or 15 minutes at a stretch. Now, why do I say 10 or 15 minutes? Because, well, the longest design documents that you will probably create are 3,000 words or maybe 4,500 words, and it shouldn't take you more than 15 minutes to go through those at the rate of about 300 words a minute, right? So 15 minutes, if you can keep your focus. It seems like it's a big deal these days because everyone's just switching from app to app. So I feel like need to mention it. That's a habit that we need to get in touch with again if we've lost touch with it. The third is distraction blocking. And with the number of distractions that exist, for me, it's my kids fighting in the background. For somebody else, it'll be LinkedIn and YouTube and Twitter, which is now X and whatever, right? You need to be able to cut out distractions and just focus in the moment on the work that you're doing and give all of that time to deep work so that you make the most of why you're going async in the first place. You want to reclaim time for more valuable stuff. And the fourth is to work independently, because far too often, every time we get stuck in a problem, our instinct is to go nudge our colleague, hey, Pilar, can you help me? Now, what have we done? We've interrupted Pilar. She might have been deep in thought, engrossed in whatever she's doing, but just because we wanted a synchronous solution right now to our problem, we've disturbed her and destroyed her flow, right? So you've got to be able to go down a rabbit hole, struggle with a problem, go to Stack Overflow, go to Google, go to ChatGPT for all I care, and find solutions to your problems. They may be suboptimal, but you need to find solutions to your problems. You need to be able to take decisions. And part of taking the decision is to say, okay, I understand this is a reversible decision. I'm going to make it. If there's a cost to the decision, I will take it. I will refactor, I will backtrack, I will do whatever. By the way, I'm documenting my rationale for the decision so that everyone knows what I did. And that's a mindset to cultivate, right? To be able to work independently. So those are four characteristics at the individual level that everyone needs to adopt if you want to be an async worker. But then this is the tricky part, that it's not enough for one person to decide one fine day that, look, we're going to be asynchronous. Because if you want to work asynchronously and none of your teammates want to work asynchronously, there you go. You faced a big blocker there. You need the network effect of the team. And so it's very important to get buy-in from your colleagues and then also buy-in from whoever is your boss. Everyone's got a boss. Every team has a boss. They need to buy into it because guess what? You change your ways of working. It's inevitable that for a period of time, whatever somebody considers as a productivity metric will dip because you used to work a certain way and now you're working in a new way. For a short period, your productivity measures will go down. Are you going to be the fall guy to take the blame for it? Most people don't want to take that hit on their, personal reputation. So you need the support of the team and you need the support of your manager. And this is where a lot of people hit a roadblock. I want to be asynchronous, but how do I get my manager convinced? How do I get my team convinced? And I think that's an interesting area to explore for anyone who wants to do this with their team. That don't try to do this solo.
Yeah, I've got lots from there. So I want to go back to, we'll get back into the team and the manager because I think that's really important. And just to say that my friend Simon Wilson and I have been working on an audio course specifically for managers who want to incorporate more async. And I think that is a very important thing to remember, is that this is a new way of working for many people. It will be very different. Everyone's done some sort of asynchronous communication, and we haven't, probably not calling it like that, but everyone has done some. But to really incorporate that async first mindset really takes relooking at how the team works, what we're thinking at every moment as well. I mean, the example you were saying about interrupting someone. So, that kind of, hey, Pilar, I need something from you, and you're suddenly interrupted. Some teams might have traditionally and historically thrived on those interruptions. That might be what makes them feel connected. And to suddenly start to think about a completely different way of working means that some part of our identity might be going away from our team. But also, if we feel like starting to incorporate these new ways of working is going to take away something from our team, then we need to know how to replace it. So, and I think this is what's missing in the general, especially the people who are still understanding how to work remotely, is that how huge a change this can be. I think it's still not there.
Yeah, indeed. And which is why when I work with teams, there are a couple of ways. I can't be everywhere, but sometimes I do work with teams. And then there are a few tools I've created for teams to pick up if they want to do this by themselves. And the first thing I ask teams to do is to collectively respond to the question of why would you want to make this shift? Because it's important to know what's in it for everyone once you believe that you've made a successful shift, right? Now, different teams vote for different things. Some teams say, well, we just want more time for deep work. We'd like to engage in less repetitive activities. We'd like to be able to, a lot of teams in my industry, which is offshoring, you'll notice that there are new people joining the team all the time and people leaving the team all the time. And teams start to feel the pressure of that, bringing new people on and then offboarding people, getting their access invalidated and all of that stuff. It's a lot of operational overhead. So teams say that, well, we'd like to be able to do that more efficiently. Or some people say, well, I'm struggling to feel included in this team. And others say, yeah, I noticed that we are struggling to include you and we'd like to be a more inclusive team. And then it can be a combination of many other motivations. You first need to recognize what those motivations are, right? And once you do that, then you're all at least aligned on the changes you're going to make and what you don't want to lose in the process. So it's always that as my first step, which is let's first figure out why we're doing this instead of blindly saying, all right, let's delete all meetings from our calendar.
Yeah, nice. That's really, really useful. And like you say, you did mention a couple of times the word change, and you mentioned before about the loss of productivity. Like with any change program, this is what this is. This is not just an adoption of a tool, and like you say, and a deletion of meetings. And
in fact, what you mentioned, for any manager who's listening to this, I think the one thing that we missed during that remote work revolution that we witnessed during the pandemic is that people's productivity, just by virtue of the fact that they were working in a completely different environment in a completely new way, using new tools that they weren't using otherwise in the previous avatar of their jobs, most people said that they didn't see too much of a dip in productivity. It says something about remote work that even with that massive change, most companies didn't see a huge dip in productivity, which then means that if you were to actually do this well, how much more productivity can you see and how much happier can people be as a consequence? And it's just something for us to explore. And I feel like with all of the stuff I keep hearing about return to office and everything else, it saddens me a bit that we haven't explored this fully as an industry.
Yeah, yeah. It's the irony. So going back to the managers as well. There's a couple of so one of the things I've observed as well is that especially in very tight-knit teams and where the team is being shaped around its team leader or manager, what I've observed is the introduction of asynchronous communication really depends on how comfortable the manager team leader is or what they need. So how do we approach that if I'm someone who does like and does thrive as a manager, being in the middle of a conversation, of a real-time conversation, and I love everything, I love having everyone around me, but I know that the team needs and could benefit from async. How do I approach it? I haven't cracked it yet.
Yeah, it's interesting because my boss, for example, I'm going to say a few good things about him. Hope he gives me a raise. Anyway, one of the epiphanies we've had leading is that part of leading, of course, it makes us feel good that we are in charge, and let's admit it, feeds our egos a little bit. So there is that egocentric part of leading. But what your employers really want you to do is drive to better outcomes. And there are two parts of that set of outcomes. You'd like to be able to do that with as little churn as possible in your team, because the more churn you have, the more you're going to have to train new people, all of that stuff. And then you'd like to be able to deliver software faster. Like to be able to deliver higher quality software, fewer bugs, all of that stuff. And so if you had to make a trade-off and say a little less for my ego and a little more for the outcomes, I think that's a worthy bargain, which gets you ahead as a manager. Because in the long run, your boss, which is the manager's boss, does not care as much as to whether you're feeding your ego enough or not, but they do care about how much of the outcomes you're driving. And in most organizations, or at least in many organizations, there are manager 360s, right? People talk about whether I like working for this manager. And if you're able to create an environment where everyone's happy, everyone feels included, everyone feels like they're able to do the best work possible in that environment, that gets you ahead in your career. So even from a very self-centered perspective, you'd like to be able to explore new ways of working that help your team be better, because eventually it makes you look better.
And on building on that, if the concern may be, if in addition to that, the concern is about relationships and the way you experience and you feed off, I think that what you're talking about applies as well, as in there's a trade-off. And what can you do that will still help those relationships, but actually you need to just think of it in a different way.
Yeah, indeed. And one of the things that I do want to mention there is that, look, we don't all need best friends at work. We want to have a trusting relationship with our colleagues. And how do professionals build trust with each other? They build trust by working with each other on problems, solving a problem together, right? They build trust because, well, I can attest to your competency because you were able to work on something with me, right? Now, that happens when people can get together and solve complex problems together, and they have the space to do so. Now, when you start talking about, let's say, agile, the common unit of work where people get together, or the common pattern of work where people get together and solve a complex problem, is pair programming, which is, well, two programmers working together at one complex problem, undistracted, no checking chat, no getting on calls. Whether it takes 4 hours, whether it takes 8 hours, or whether it takes the entire week, you're at it, right? Now, that's where you build the bond, because now you get to see somebody's problem-solving approach firsthand. You can get a real sense of what their skills are firsthand. And that's when I know that, well, when I'm in the trenches, I'd like this person beside me. So let's not forget that the strongest connections that professionals build are around work. And you'd like to be able to create more of those opportunities rather than punctuating them with frivolous meetings. Sorry, I shouldn't say frivolous, but
frivolous meetings.
But I mean, seriously, in 2023, do we really need meetings to say, this is what I did yesterday and this is what I'm going to do today? Well, that should be just transparent all the time. You don't need a meeting for that. And we have meetings for that. And they take 45 minutes of every single day.
Yeah, I mean, that is really important, because a lot of the time what is happening in those meetings, especially the ones that actually you could replace very simply with an asynchronous process, what the people are really doing is catching up with each other and enjoying each other's company. So name that, and let's make that meeting about that, rather than try to hide the fact that the social aspect of work is also something that we love talking about this stuff, but we could really start to dissect and to be very honest about what it is that how we connect with other people at work. If it is the purely social chit chat because that's how we build our relationships, let's do that. If it is actually building relationships through the work, let's make sure we've got work that we can get our teeth into so we really connect. But again, that's this thing that social means having a drink after work, where actually there's so much socialization going on at so many different levels. That is fascinating.
Yeah, indeed. And that's the thing. I mentioned to a lot of leaders that, look, if you care about something, you should be able to fund it. So let's imagine that you really care about your people having great relationships with each other. Are you willing to fund it with retreats? Once every quarter, 4 times a year? Is that something you're willing to fund? Flying everyone to one location for a couple of days in the middle of the week. Don't make them do that on the weekend. Is it important enough? And sometimes I hear the answer that, we don't have a budget. Okay, well, then that just means it's not important enough, right? And in that case, don't force people to do this outside their work hours. And certainly don't force them to do this at the cost of the work that they signed up to do with you, right? Because that's one of the reasons why we choose employment, that we'll get to practice our skills and get better at what we enjoy doing at work. So, well, put your money where your mouth is one part of addressing this. And you'll notice that a lot of the remote first firms take great pride in getting their people together for these retreats. Sometimes it'll be once a month. Others that can't afford that frequency do it once a quarter. But they make it a point to get everyone together.
Yeah, I love that. Put your money where your mouth is. How I like that. How important is this to you? And I think the other missing piece in the whole adoption of async is that some people, and going back to diversity, some people can build very strong relationships asynchronously and at a distance. But that is a missing piece. Again, everyone's talking about how do we build culture? How do we build networks in the organization? And they haven't got any online communities of practice, for example, or they don't have spaces for people to check in, when they're having a coffee break to see what people are up to. And again, it's this async is broad. And it can support different aspects of work.
Yeah. And a lot of this is intentionality as well, right? So you mentioned you want to have knowledge sharing. Are you facilitating that with spaces where communities can interact with each other? Do you have a platform where if I had an idea, I can blog about it internally and share it with the remaining 2,000 of my colleagues? So there is a lot of intentionality that goes into it. Are you creating space within people's workday, not outside people's workday, if this is important, where they can do all of that knowledge sharing? They can write things up and create an asset that somebody else can use. And intentionality is the key to running any distributed organization. You cannot run a distributed organization hoping for happy accidents to happen.
Right. So I'm going to take you on that and move on to the next bit of what I wanted to talk to you about, because it builds in very, very well. That importance that you've said. If we want knowledge sharing, if we want all of that, we've got to create the space. And if we're a business leader as well, we have to role model. It is okay to spend half an hour of your day blogging, sharing your ideas or whatever it is, your ways of working, etc. You are great at that. I have loved how you work out loud. I am very much in awe. And I've been seeing how you do that mainly on LinkedIn. So is this... Let me go back, because I think I'm making some assumptions about how you've worked. How have you worked on your book? How have you used the open space to work on your book and your ideas?
Yeah, it's interesting. So when I got the idea of writing a book, I spoke to a bunch of people who had written books earlier. And at one point, I spoke to Martin Fowler. And, he asked me a few very pertinent questions, which I interpreted this way. And I'll tell you what that this way is. So, firstly, if you want to write a book, then you're seeking an identity, and that identity is that of an author. And you need to ask yourself, okay, so what does an author do? An author writes. So you need to be able to have that muscle that allows you to be able to write on a regular basis. That's the habit you need to build if this is the identity you're trying to pursue. And so that means that if you have to have that habit, you have to write regularly. Now, no publisher will take you seriously if you do not have any credibility as a first-time author, having produced any work before this, right? If you just go with an outline, it's very easy for publishers to reject you because you've not produced any work, right? On the other hand, if you've already produced a body of work, which a bunch of people have looked at, then it gets you a little more credibility in front of the publisher. But the bigger thing is it is something that you do to prove to yourself that, well, I can write. Maybe you can write badly, but you can still write, right?
Yes.
And that's the thing. The secret to writing a book is to write 300 words every day. If you can write 300 words every day, within a year, you'll publish a book. That's just the fact of the matter. You must have a clear idea around it, but that's how it is. So I just got myself into that zone where if I didn't do anything, I would at least open up Google Docs. And my worst day would be writing maybe 200 words. And then if I had a whole bunch of those bad days, then by the end of a week, I'd have a coherent article, which means that I pushed myself to write at least one article every week. And then by the time I'd put out 10, 15 articles, I'd built up some sort of interest on LinkedIn amongst people who were also aligned with the topic. And so I was getting feedback and reactions, and I felt like, okay, now this is starting to become a coherent body of work. And I was then able to take some part of that work, think about what I'm going to do ahead, and put together a draft of the book, draft of the outline, and then send it off to a bunch of publishers. And I was also able to show them the website as a sample of my writing, right? Because then people know, all right, okay, this person can write. And once they know that you can write, then conversation becomes a little easier. Because as a first-time author, Sumeet, Moghe, who? You're nobody, right? So for a nobody to get recognized, you've got to at least have some material to back you.
And were you used to putting stuff out there for people to see and comment on? Have you been doing that before?
I used to do that very rarely and occasionally using LinkedIn primarily as a platform. I got off Facebook and Instagram and all of that long back. But putting out stuff isn't new to me because I don't know if you know this. I also do a little bit of photography. So there was a period of time when I was putting out photos and photo stories quite a bit. So I'm generally not shy to put things out. And probably that just helped me that I'd been doing this in another form earlier, but professionally and in a very serious way, trying to create a book out of it, this is probably my first attempt.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the acknowledgement that there can be some discomfort of some kind when we're doing this, because I'm thinking of taking back into an organizational practice even the thought of putting out your ideas and just having anyone in the organization, maybe because it's an internal blog, commenting on it. It can be nerve-wracking for people who are not used to it. But it's, again, you talked about a muscle as well. It's another skill to develop.
Yeah, and it's an interesting point you make. When people comment on your work, at least right at the start, you've got an emotional attachment to your work, right? It's another of your babies, apart from my kids, who are real human beings. So even when I got into the serious act of writing, and then there were people reviewing, a bunch of people who really helped me with feedback. The first pieces of feedback I got, which were structured in nature, I was a little dismayed to read because I was like, really? Are you going to say that about everything that I've written? And then I realized that if people are saying something, that means they care. If they stop saying it, that means that they don't care about it, which would be a rather bad place to be. And if they care about making it better and they're showing their care with feedback, well worded or not, maybe I can just remove myself a little emotionally and look at the feedback for what it is and see if there's a way to incorporate it. And I remember one of the reviewers gave me, for my manuscript, 230 odd pieces of feedback.
Wow.
And when I got that truckload of feedback, I was like, wow, I must suck at this thing. And then I paused for a day. That's a trick I learned, that don't react to the feedback the day you get it. Sleep over it, react to it the next day. And when I looked at it the next day, I was emotionally removed from it. I was able to look at it point by point by point. And okay, this makes sense. This makes sense. Oh, okay, I don't agree 100% with this, but I can incorporate this, and so on and so forth, right?
Yeah, nice. Yes, I love that. And can you remind us, is it async-agile.org is the website where you were
correct,
blogging
yes.
all that time with amazing graphics? Do you do the graphics yourself?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really nice. I love the color scheme and everything. I have been following it. So you've got this. I mean, you are very collaborative in nature in that way, and we've all learned a lot from your ideas. And now tell us about this other thing that you're doing now, almost in parallel and in conjunction, which is, of course, the manifesto. What are you calling it? Is it the Async-First Manifesto? What's the name of it?
Yeah, I'm calling it the Async-First Manifesto, and I put out a release candidate today with a few modifications. Some of those, in fact, came from suggestions that you made. So you should see the document. It's got a slightly new version. The idea, it's not original at all. Many listeners will probably know the Agile Manifesto, and I really admire the simplicity of that document because in a few lines, it describes a new way of building software and collaborating in software teams, right? And I feel like I wanted to get a similar document out to explain this paradigm shift. And the paradigm shift being moving from a very meeting centric culture to a more asynchronous way of working. And what are the values that describe that way of working? And so, if you notice, very similar to the Agile Manifesto, there are 4 value statements. And then there are some principles that add a little bit of color to those value statements. And I don't know how far it gets, but it's really a hat tip to the OGs who wrote the Agile Manifesto to, steal their format and say, look, I'm adding to this format, and this is how I believe modern collaboration should look like. I'm so grateful to everyone who played along and gave feedback, because you'll notice heaps of comments in that document as well, right? And again, the same exercise, you write something, somebody else gives you feedback, and first you feel like, oh, couldn't you appreciate this? And then I feel like, no, the document actually has turned out better because of all the feedback everyone's had for it.
It is really interesting, the feedback as well, looking through, because you learn a lot from one. You've got the main body over which everyone is gathering. And for me, these are spaces for people to gather as well, gather asynchronously. So you've got the main body of work. So everyone, back to your point, everyone's coming for the work. That's what interests us, is we're coming for the work. And then, of course, maybe first point of contact was we want to support you. So then we go to the work, which is interesting. And then you meet all these other people that Some of them you know, some of them you don't. So through all the comments being in the open, rather than someone sending you an email that is closed, all the comments are in the open. We all learn from each other's comments. We all react to each other's comments, whether we share the reactions or not. So it's a big piece of asynchronous learning. But again, we're missing these opportunities sometimes in our organizations to learn in these more organic ways. I mean, you were talking earlier about what we're doing is actually creating a space for spontaneous discussion. Only the spontaneity is asynchronous. We still don't know. Some of those comments, we don't know where they're going to lead us. Sometimes the comments can go off into something else. So that's a great example. Is that document still available at least to view? Yeah.
No, it's available to comment. Anyone can still comment on it. There's a page for it on my website. They can go to the document. I'll put out a LinkedIn post shortly with the release candidate as well. So people should be able to see the latest version. But the cool thing is, look, if we had to try and get all of the people who engaged on that document onto a meeting, we'd never be able to do that, right? And we've been able to gather fairly diverse inputs on that document just by virtue of the fact that it's open and anyone can comment, right? And there's always that fear, what if somebody vandalizes the document and says something obscene? There's always that risk. But as you notice, no one's done that. And that reaffirms my faith in the fact that most people want to do the right thing.
Great. Good. We're going to wrap up then. So we could carry on talking about this. Maybe we will carry on at another point. But just, is there anything else before I give listeners? I'll give listeners your contact details and then you can correct me if I get any of them wrong. But is there anything else you want to say before we wrap up?
Well, I just wanted to say thank you for listening. And by the way, I wanted to put out an offer for the listeners of this podcast. So for 10 days from the day that this podcast airs, which is whenever it does air, there will be a special discount for listeners of the podcast. So you just need to navigate to informit/async, informit.com/async, and you can put the link in the show notes. And if you use the coupon code NOT-DISTANT, you get 35% off the Async-First Playbook. For listeners of this podcast, depending on the region you are in, if you're in the US, you can get the physical copy shipped to you for free. But for everyone else, you can get the ebook at a massive discount.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you for the reminder. And I love the code not distant. I just love it. Well, you're very active on LinkedIn, of course. So there you are, Sumeet Moghe. We'll put the link in the show notes. People can go directly there. And of course, async-agile.org. Are you still writing new posts in Async Agile? Yes.
I write every week.
Yeah, that's great. Wow. So there, listeners, just subscribe to the blog, go and comment there, because there are some comments as well around. And then, of course, you mentioned in passing, which I actually, when I was listening to Lisette's conversation with you on collaboration superpowers, I went over and looked at sumeetmoghe.com and looked at your amazing photographs.
Thank you.
Oh, my God. Wildlife.
Yeah.
Is it mainly? Wow. Are you still taking pictures?
I head out every time I can. In fact, the little secret is that my job funds that passion, which is to go out in the wild and photograph.
Nice. I love that. I love that. Anywhere else we need to send listeners to, we've got your LinkedIn, async-agile.org, and then sumeetmoghe.com.
That's pretty much all they need to know.
That's it. That's good. Well, thank you very, very much for stopping by, Sumeet.
It was an absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And once more, listeners, the title of the book is The Async-First Playbook, Remote Collaboration Techniques for Agile Software Teams, and you can get a discount by using the code NOT-DISTANT over the next 10 days. Also, I will have mentioned, I mentioned, I know in the conversation with Sumeet, I mentioned the fact that my colleague Simon Wilson and I have released the course on navigating asynchronous communication. It's an audio-first course specifically designed for new managers or managers new to remote teams. It would lay the foundations, and it has a lot of calls to action, and it looks at asynchronous communication and how it can improve the team from a range of different ways. So just to let you know, I will put the link in the show notes. We are selling the Audio First course through two platforms, Gumroad and Thinkific. Gumroad has only the audio with, then you can ask us for a PDF with all the text version, but it's got a really nice audio player. So if you are really an audio first person, if you're listening to the show amongst lots of other podcasts, grab the one in Gumroad. If you're more of a sitting down by the computer and you prefer sitting down at the computer and listening and taking notes on the computer and stuff like that, and you like a little multiple choice questions, then grab the one in Thinkific. And any questions, pilar@virtualnotdistant.com. So I hope today's episode with the wonderful conversation we've had with Sumeet, and then the two resources, a book and an audio course, that if you really are looking at stepping up your async game, that we've provided enough for you. So thank you once more to Sumeet for stopping by. I look forward to seeing what else he creates. I'm a big fan of his. And listeners, thank you very, very much for listening. A big thank you to Ross Winter for polishing the audio of this episode. And thank you, listeners, for choosing to listen to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast. Remember to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app, and you can check out the full show notes over at virtualnotdistant.com/podcasts. Talking of podcasts, we have another show you can listen to, Management Cafe, which you should also be able to find on all podcast apps. I have been Pilar Orti. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, enjoy.